Welcome one and all, it is I, the Semolina of Cinnamon, the Vicar of Very Silly Attitudes, the Chancellor of Cheerleaders, and of course, your extraterrestrial Captain Kangaroo. Today I'd like to talk about Quibi. Who the fuck and twice in the butt. That's going to do it for today's show. But remember, every person in heat has a story from hell that you have Yeti ears. All your hats with dew will glisten. And as always, have a sweater day.
Hello, Gotham City. It's me, Bane. Yes, my hair has changed, thank you for noticing. But don't worry, now's not the time for fear. That comes later. I wanted to bring something to your attention. Look at this picture of Batman. Oh, wait, no, not that picture. That's for later. Look at this picture of Batman. Do you notice anything? What is the only part of his face that isn't covered by his mask? Huh? That's right, his nose and mouth. Now I ask you, which one of us is more likely to spread COVID-19? It's Batman! That's right! Now who's the villain? Now who's the hero? Let Batman gallivant around towns, killing immunocompromised people. Your family, your loved ones, your grandmother. Who taught you how to make shortbread when you were a child? And when Batman gets sick, well, nobody cared about me before I put on the mask. Let people care about you. Wear a mask. Take control of your city. That is all.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your Master of Fun and Wonder, your Viceroy of Verisimilitude, your Sommelier of Cinema, your Archbishop of Banterbury, and your Chancellor of Cheerfulness. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett, coming at you with Robservations episode number 472. That's right, Rob casting at you on this Monday from the Robservatory. That is correct. Boy, another day, another dollar. It just seems like, I don't think that there's ever been a time in my life where I can really I can really count on one day just sliding into the other. It seems like every day has become the same. Over and over and over again. It's not like Groundhog Day or Palm Springs. It's not as fun. Although it could be as fun, depending on your point of view, I suppose. But anyway, I figured that today, of course, on Whining About Movies, Elizabeth and I are going to be talking about Christopher Nolan's Inception, which is now 10 years old, shocking as that may seem. That was a movie I saw 8 times in the theater. It was particularly something I was enamored of. I kept going back. And it was funny because I think I saw that movie every time I went and saw it. I went by myself, I think. I just kept going back. I saw it at the ArcLight 10 times. And boy, how I wish I could go to the ArcLight and see it again. Because as many people know, Inception is being released in various markets around the world with clips for the upcoming the upcoming Tenet, Inception. Inception is being shown around the world with new clips from the upcoming Tenet, which brings me to Well, if you watched the John Campea show, you heard this live on the air. This news broke while we were on the air this morning on the John Campea show. It's something that, I've been saying for quite some time, have I not? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Tenet, which was supposed to come out last Friday, and now was going to come out in August, has now been delayed indefinitely. Tenet will not be coming out in August, and here is the breaking news. This from Deadline. Tenet, undated for now. Warner Brothers to announce new date imminently. Picks theatrical global rollout won't be traditional. Anthony D'Alessandro, once again, from Deadline today at 9:30 this morning. Warner Brothers is taking Tenet off the theatrical release calendar for now because the U.S. major circuits remain closed in New York and Los Angeles due to coronavirus. Warner Brothers is now prepping the film for an unconventional theatrical rollout. Unconventional theatrical rollout, that could mean many different things, which won't be a global day and date release that was expected. What does Warner Brothers mean by unconventional? Essentially, with theaters reopening in China, Asian markets like South Korea vibrant, and other, as we know, from the success of Peninsula, the sequel to Train to Busan, and other offshore territories in Europe and Japan coming back online, there's a good probability that the Christopher Nolan movie will open abroad first. In regards to the U.S., where drive-ins are dominating the business and just over 1,000 of the nation's 5,000 theaters are open, Tenet is poised to play wherever and whenever it can, even if New York City and Los Angeles aren't back online. The studio also announced that Conjuring 3 is moving from its September 11th release date to June 4th of next year. As we first told you on June 30th, I've heard from exhibition sources a scenario whereby Tenet possibly starts its U.S. rollout on September 11th, but that, of course, isn't definite yet. Warner Brothers is looking forward to a long theatrical tale on Tenet as Nolan is a champion of the big screen, and I understand there aren't any plans to collapse the window, i.e. making the John David Washington movie available in the home shortly, either on HBO Max or PVOD. After a brief theatrical debut, the studio is expecting to draw 2/3 of the film's box office from overseas, so a theatrical play is at the top of their mindset. At this time, the studio is rewriting the distribution playbook in real time and will remain flexible in response to the erratic COVID-19 world we live in. Above all, Warner Brothers isn't turning back on exhibition. It will be interesting to see how the other major studios which had movies around Tenet, i.e. Disney with Mulan, on August 21st, Solstice Studios with Unhinged on July 31st, Sony TriStar with Broken Hearts Gallery on August 7th, which just moved, by the way, United Artists releasing Orion's Bill and Ted Face the Music, respond. All of these movies haven't been rescheduled as a block, with Tenet's shift from July 17th to July 31st to previously August 12th. The major circuits, AMC, Regal, Cinemark, have held off on reopening, even in markets where it's okay, largely due to the fact that there isn't any major studio product. Our goals throughout this process have been to ensure the highest odds of success for our films while also being ready to support our theater partners with new content as soon as they could safely reopen, said Toby Emmerich, chairman Warner Brothers Picture Group, in a statement this morning. We're grateful for the support we've received from exhibitors and remained steadfast in our commitment to the theatrical experience around the world. Unfortunately, the pandemic continues to proliferate, causing us to reevaluate our release dates. Amidst all of this continued uncertainty, we have decided to vacate the current dates for our next two releases. We will share a new 2020 release date immediately for Tenet, so they still are saying it's going to come out in 2020. When that is, I don't know. We will share a new 2020 release date eminently for Tenet, Christopher Nolan's wholly original and mind-blowing feature. We're not treating Tenet like a traditional global day-and-date release, and our upcoming marketing and distribution plans will reflect that. Additionally, we will be moving the next installment from our most successful horror franchise, The Conjuring 3, to June 4th, 2021. Nolan has been eager to be on the forefront of the effort to reopen theaters, but Warner Brothers has had to move the film repeatedly, so what happened this morning isn't a surprise. All Nolan movies carry event-sized budgets, so there's plenty of risk here. The studio has been playing Tenet commercials right along that hint at a mind-bending concept on the order of Inception. In addition, Warner's is looking at a non-traditional marketing campaign for Tenet as well, which will include less TV and outdoor, more digital, along with a more affordable and shorter campaign window. I've heard for quite some time that the studio has a campaign locked and ready to go. Today's release date changes only pertains to Tenet and The Conjuring 3. Wonder Woman 1984 and Legendary's Dune remain scheduled respectively for October 2nd and October 18th. Well, folks, we have only ourselves to blame for this one. Torrin Atkinson, by the way, I want to thank Torrin for sending in his Bane video about wearing masks. Whether you take this seriously or not, the numbers of COVID cases, whatever you believe, you might want to believe the reality of it all. Our government is no longer allowing the CDC to get direct data from hospitals. Why is that, do you think? Why wouldn't you let anybody from the Center of Disease Control, which, by the way, up until this year has been a fairly reputable agency, and by the way, they still are, but our federal leadership has completely abandoned us in our hour of need. I've never seen quite anything like it, really. And not to get really political here, but you know what? If you're just going to abdicate the throne that you're sitting on and not take any responsibility, but guess what? Tomorrow, Donald Trump is going to start his COVID addresses once again. If you saw, I encourage everyone to watch his yesterday's Fox News interview with Chris Wallace. Please do. And you will see one of the most inept, ridiculous performances by any world leader that I've seen in my entire lifetime. And the only reason I say this is because I want to see Tenet. And I blame the complete lack of leadership at the federal level on this matter. And I've never seen, once again, I've talked about on this show how I think that if you read, by the way, Jeff Goldblum reported, as we talked about on the John Campea show, there is a 109-page document that everybody involved with Jurassic Park Dominion had to read before they went back to work. I would suggest, once again, as I've said in the past, that if Hollywood and the way productions are run, I mean, I'm talking productions at the production level when you're actually shooting something. If we would allow our country to be run the way that Hollywood productions are run, we could solve a lot of our problems. Like, why don't they take that 109-page document that, by the way, is not just to keep people safe. It's also to make sure that Universal is free and clear. If a movie studio, before starting production again on a movie, can issue a 109-page document about how to keep the workplace safe from COVID-19, where the fuck is our federal government with something similar? I'd like to know. But you know what? For all of the people that say that we Hollywood elites, which, by the way, I don't even know what that means, considering I've barely ever worked with anyone that's from Hollywood. We're from all around the world. But anyway, let me just say, Hollywood Studios, 109-page document about going back to work. I'm waiting. Where are we going to get? Are we going to get a 109-page document back from our, say, federal government about how to reopen our economy? Because I'd like to see it. I'd really like to see that happen. But we haven't received any. There has been no coordinated federal response to this pandemic. Zero. But there is in Hollywood. So, say what you want. Universal released 109, well, they didn't release it publicly, but anybody who's working on Jurassic Park Dominion, I mean, maybe they should. Maybe since the Center for Disease Control isn't being sent the data from hospitals around the country at the request of the White House, maybe Universal Studios and the CDC should coordinate their efforts and release that 109-page document to, I don't know, the United States, So perhaps every business might have guideposts to lead the way to reopen their businesses? Maybe, just a thought. Once again, Hollywood, for all the slings and arrows we suffer, they know how to get back to business. I would have thought we would live in a country that apparently would also know how to do that, unless you're talking the federal government with Donald Trump at the top. And I'm not necessarily partisan about this. I'm just telling you, Universal is starting to shoot Jurassic Park Dominion again with a 109-page document as told to us by Jeff Goldblum himself about how do you start shooting movies again amidst a global pandemic. Well, gosh, leave it to Hollywood studios to know how to run their businesses effectively. Because that's one thing I know in terms of production. When you're on a movie studio, you're on a set of any movie, there's few more efficiently run businesses than production. We're talking movie sets. I'm not talking at the studio level. I'm talking movie sets. People who work on movie sets know what the fuck they're doing. They know how to run their business because every second on a movie set costs money. Every second. Just saying. Therein ends my I guess it's a rant. I don't know. But why is it that Hollywood movie studios know how to do this, but apparently not our federal government? It's kind of embarrassing, really. But I'm proud, once again, that I've worked in the entertainment industry for 30 years, and my first jobs, where I started was as an art department production assistant on a New Line Cinema film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, Leatherface, written by Dave Scow, who, what did Dave Scow also write? Yes, The Hills Run Red, a film I produced that is now available on Blu-ray with 6.5 hours of special features. So I haven't plugged that yet, at least not this week, but there you go. But let's get back to what you all really, really want to hear about. And what you really want to hear about, and what I really want to talk about, because I'm frankly sick of talking about this pandemic. I thought by this time I would have already seen Tenet, but unfortunately that isn't the case, which, to be honest, kind of bums me out. I mean, it would have been very nice to have seen Tenet. I would really have enjoyed seeing Tenet, because I really want to see Tenet. And I know, don't you? I think you all do too, right? Sure you do. You know you do. Anyway, so there's an article that a couple days back was published in The Hollywood Reporter, and it was by Richard Newby, who I've covered his articles before, and I wanted to share this one with you because it's pretty good. At least I thought it was pretty good. And here it is. How Inception redefined Christopher Nolan. And this was published on July 16th at 10 o'clock in the morning by Richard Newby. 10 years after its release, audiences are still debating Nolan's labyrinthian heist film, which proved the filmmaker's name alone was a selling point for moviegoers. What is the most resilient parasite? Bacteria? A virus? An intestinal worm? An idea. In 2001, Christopher Nolan, hot off an Oscar nomination for his screenplay for Memento, presented Warner Brothers with an idea. Like an architect, he built upon the foundations of this idea, and what was originally a horror movie centered on dream thieves grew and became closer to a heist film set in the landscape of constructed dreams. But the idea was too big for the novice director. The blueprint roughly sketched and lacking the necessary doors and windows, Nolan moved on, but fostered a long-running relationship with Warner Brothers that began with Insomnia in 2002, which led to his successful reboot of the Batman franchise with Batman Begins, and even a more successful sequel, The Dark Knight, which were bridged by his first foray into ambitious sci-fi with the modestly successful The Prestige for Buena Vista. But during this time, as Nolan's star rose in Hollywood, that idea he'd pitched in 2001 was never demolished. As his technical skills and storytelling craft were refined over the first decade of the 21st century, Nolan continued to lay bricks upon the unfinished structure in his mind until the time came for a new blueprint, a revised script for a film titled Inception. It was The Dark Knight that made Christopher Nolan a household name. But it was Inception that proved his name alone was a selling point, and that audiences weren't just fans of Batman and the Joker, but Nolan himself. Inception was an invitation to the filmmaker and to audiences that said, to quote Tom Hardy's Eames, "You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling." An ambitious sci-fi project with an all-star cast featuring Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Hardy, Ellen Page, Cillian Murphy, Marion Cotillard, Ken Watanabe, and Michael Caine, Inception blended heady concepts with crowd-pleasing blockbuster elements. It's a cinematic union that Nolan has become known for in his efforts to create highbrow yet audience-friendly spectacle. Inception went on to gross $828.3 million worldwide, and today remains the third highest-grossing live-action film based on an original screenplay, only behind James Cameron's one-two punch of Titanic and Avatar. Inception also garnered Nolan his first Best Picture nomination and won 4 Oscars, including cinematography for Wally Pfister. The money and the accolades are certainly no minor achievements, but what's most impressive about Inception a decade on is how we audience members continue to discuss, theorize, and uncover new details within the corners of Nolan's labyrinthian heist film that sees its character arcs writ large across a dreamscape. In terms of pure spectacle, there's a quality of Inception that allows the film to inspire awe with each repeated viewing. There are set pieces in Inception from the folding city, the rotating hallway fight, the mountain hospital battle, and the ruined dream cityscape that remain just as powerful as they were the first time we experienced the film in theaters. For a film as popular as this one is, it's difficult even 10 years later to discuss those moments. Backed by Hans Zimmer's now iconic score, in new terms, the technical mastery on display, modern movie-making magic at its finest, has been highlighted time and again. It's not so much a question of how those set pieces were created or where they fit into Nolan's multi-layered structure of the film's dream levels that remain compelling, but how Nolan uses those moments to make complicated lore and technical jargon land as easily with audiences as a comic book panel. Nolan's big ideas concerning time, legacy, reality, and faith are grounded through expansive set pieces that are clearly attached to a specific objective, and his exposition is given on the go, with Adrienne Page serving as a stand-in for the audience, asking the logical questions at the very moment we as audience members are wondering the same thing. These aspects give the film a narrative clarity that distinguishes it from other movies associated with the quality of dreams, such as Inception's oft-compared to predecessor, Paprika, in 2006. By the way, Paprika is an animated film. Satoshi Kon, I have it right over there. These memorable set pieces and easily digestible bursts of exposition provide the walls and corners of Nolan's structure, but it's the film's themes that provide a route through it. That's a badass picture, by the way. Perhaps the best way to traverse the thematic details of Nolan's maze is to start at the exit point. After all, it's the ending of Inception that has spawned so much of the discussion and debate over the past 10 years. What should we make of Cobb's totem, the spinning top? Some swear that the top wobbles before the screen cuts to black, and some even say they can hear it fall. Some have even theorized that Cobb never even really left the dream Dan Yusuf took him on to Mombasa, given that he hastily grabs his top from the bathroom sink before he has a chance to complete its rotation. It's worth noting that in the shooting script, the film ends with, behind him on the table, the spinning top is still spinning. Nolan has said the question of whether Cobb is dreaming or not at the end of the film is the thing he's asked about the most, and he has remained diligent that it's up to the audience to decide. What's clear is that if Nolan wanted to provide a concrete answer to the question, he would have. But the point of the spinning top and whether it continues to spin indefinitely or whether it falls is that in terms of Cobb's arc, it doesn't matter, because within those two continuous rotations are the shadows of two ideas, regret and reality. Early in Inception, after the botched cabal job, there is an invocation of the theme of the film concludes with. So do you want to take a leap of faith or become an old man filled with regret waiting to die? Sato Watanabe asks Cobb. Every central character in the film is required to take a leap of faith, to pull off the act of dream implanting at the center of the film's plot, but only Cobb and Robert Fisher Murphy are burdened with regret. Through the events of the film, they emerge on the other side with a new sense of reality and a burden lifted and an opportunity to escape dying alone. What's interesting about the journeys of Cobb and the thief at the forefront of the operation, and Fisher, the unassuming Mark, is that the global reality of their actions give way to not one based on the salvation of all mankind. Sato hires Cobb and Arthur to perform Inception so that Robert Fisher will dissolve his father's energy company in the wake of the patriarch's death, allowing Sato's competing energy corporation to gain a monopoly over the market. We don't spend much time in the not-too-distant future where Nolan's film takes place, but any future where energy is controlled by a singular corporation and denizens spend their lives dreaming, as we see in the Dream Den in Mombasa, is far from a utopia. Nolan isn't interested in saving the world in Inception, a journey he'd go on to explore in Interstellar and Dunkirk, and seemingly the upcoming Tenet. Rather, he's interested in saving the personal worlds, the small-scale reality and the perception of it of two men, Cobb and Fisher, who, in the genre language of the heist film, should be enemies, but through the course of the dream sharing become allies. Fisher's love for his father, because of the incepted idea that Maurice Fisher, Pete Postlethwaite, wanted his son to be his own man, is validated by the end of the film. Like Cobb's return to his children, James and Philippa, it doesn't matter if it's actually true. It becomes reality because of the perception that it's true. And the perception of love, of belonging, supersedes any other measure of reality. Fisher's relationship with his father, and more importantly, Cobb's reunion with his children, are the only realities worth saving and holding on to. What's also interesting about the personal salvation at the heart of Inception is that the film is one of the rare blockbusters without a villain. Sure, Marion Cotillard, makes for a compelling and sometimes frightening femme fatale character, but she's merely a manifestation of Cobb's subconscious, his failure to handle his grief. She's the perception of a threat, a lack of love in his life, which gives her credible reality as an adversary, but not as the loving partner Cobb so desperately wishes she was. As Cobb says to the projection of Mal during the film's climax, in one of the best line deliveries of DiCaprio's celebrated career, I wish more than anything, but I can't imagine you with all your complexity, all of your perfection, all of your imperfection. Look at you. You're just a shade of my real wife. You're the best I can do, but I'm sorry, you're just not good enough. This moment of catharsis should be taken as evidence that Cobb is not dreaming at the film's end, that he's able to perceive reality as it is, but there exists the question of whether his young children, who he has seen so infrequently and have yet to develop all the complexities associated with adulthood, could even be perceived with the same critical eye that he looks upon the shadow of a woman he once spent his lifetime with. Again, we arrive at the point that Cobb's children, reality or dream, are good enough. Reflecting on Inception, it's not surprising that Nolan began work on it shortly after finishing Memento, given the thematic similarities that they share. The word memento stems from the phrase memento mori, a Latin expression that translates to remember you will die. Come on, man. All of us X-Files fans remember that. Thus, a memento became a symbolic reminder of the inevitability of death, and during medieval Europe, the depiction of a skull became a common memento. Through the ages, the term and the idea evolved into a keepsake associated with a specific memory, hence the tattoos and photographs Lenny collects in Memento. Looking at Memento in context with Inception, another word to describe a memento is a totem, though the latter term has a more sacred association, but is no less spiritual. The totems in Inception, Cobb's spinning top, Arthur's loaded die, Ariadne's chess piece, are all mementos. Ariadne's chess piece. Pardon me. I've been saying her name wrong this whole article. Ariadne's chess piece are all mementos, reminders of potentially forgotten truth, that their dream world is not real, and however immortal they may feel within that dreamscape, as Cobb and Mal felt during the 50 years inside the city they created, their mortal selves are waiting in reality. At the end of Memento, Lenny ignores where his mementos have led him, the truth that he has already found and killed his wife's murderer and the man who took away his ability to produce new memories. He ignores reality, destroying the photos and evidence that led him to the truth, forgetting to live and forgetting to end, so that his journey can continue and he can live out his cyclical existence. But Cobb ignores his totem at the end of Inception so that his journey might end. So the elevator in his mind that takes him up and down through his history of regrets can finally stop and he can remember to live. It's been a decade since Christopher Nolan completed his maze, but we're still going back through it again and again, discovering new pathways complete with unseen illusions and symbology, and building on top of what he left for us by way of new perceptions. While sturdy and high-reaching, the pathways through Nolan's grand idea are not cold, as Nolan's filmography has wrongly been criticized of being. If anything, Inception radiates warmth and light, the image of a father hugging his children in the sunlight carrying more narrative weight and thematic resonance than the cool gray of a spinning top. In his story of a father's journey to return home to his children, Christopher Nolan helped elevate the genre, blockbuster filmmaking, and audience expectations while never losing sight of the fact that regret and reality are both made manageable by love. I thought Richard did a fine job with this article. I wanted to share it. I find Christopher Nolan to be one of the most exciting filmmakers working today, although I don't think his films resonate with me the way that, say, Stanley Kubrick's do. Because I find Nolan to be he's a clinician. His movies are very clinical, and they're not perfect. There's a lot of logic problems. Anyone who's watched The Dark Knight Rises, there's so many questions you're asking yourself. You're like, wait a minute. I mean, one of the most glaring for me in The Dark Knight Rises is, so Bane attacks basically the stock market, ruins Bruce Wayne, and then in the next scene, Bruce Wayne goes back to his house and his power has been shut off. Well, let me tell you, I'm an expert in having my power shut off, and it doesn't work that way. You can skate for quite some time before they come for you. And if you're Bruce Wayne and you're known to be wealthy, you can basically call up and say, there was a problem with the stock market today. There's a lot of logic issues, I think, both in Dark Knight Rises and Interstellar, that leave me scratching my head. I'm always like, wait, what? Come on, man. Like, what? Really? Like, Batman spent some time putting gasoline on a bridge to burn his bat symbol there? Like, when did he do that? Like, why would he do that? There's all kinds of things. So I don't think Christopher Nolan is a filmmaker beyond reproach. And I think that Inception has a lot of stuff in it where there's a lot of, say, dream logic where it's intentionally not clear, because I don't think Christopher Nolan actually had the answer. I mean, he might have. Ariadne, I don't even know, like, she's the architect of these dreams. What exactly does that mean? You actually never really see her building a dream. There's a lot of gobbledygook in Inception. For as much as I love it, it's a movie where we are definitely, as an audience, imposing a lot onto the film that I don't know if it's necessarily there. There's enough there. And I think Christopher Nolan builds sort of a room that we go and fill with what we want to see. And to me, in my mind, I don't think there's nothing to me in Inception that happens in the real world. It's all a dream. It's a dream from the very opening moments of the movie when Leonardo DiCaprio's on the beach to the very end of the film. And I think that's okay, because the whole film is it's a dream. The inception that you're looking at, the inception of the title, in my mind, is the whole movie itself. I do think that Cobb is a real person, and I think he's dealing with real grief. He's lost his wife, and he wants to get back to his kids, but not necessarily because he's not being allowed back into the United States. I think that his state of mind in his grief hasn't allowed him to move back to the real world yet. All of Inception is an interesting way to show a man dealing with grief. And I like that. I think that's, I guess, why I related to it, because at the time, I was feeling rather low about certain things. And what's interesting is, what do you deal with in your mind when things are going, or you're like, if I could travel through time, I would do this better. And your mind makes up elaborate daydreams or scenarios, or at least mine does, about how things could have gone differently. I imagine that the Monty Python aliens in that Simon Pegg movie imbued me with powers where I could change reality, and I know that they were seeing whether or not I'd be a good guy or not. So, of course, if that were to happen, if I was given godlike powers, I'd do things like I would go heal the Great Barrier Reef, and I would go fix all the radiation in Fukushima and Chernobyl and get rid of all of that. And wherever there was famine, I would spend the first hour or maybe daydreaming that I would fix the world, fix all the actual ecological problems, take all the CO2 out of the air, refreeze the ice caps, that kind of thing. But that's what Inception is to me, and that's why I love it. I mean, I really think it's a man. It's a story about a man who can't get past the grief of his wife dying, and he's crushed as a human being, and he knows he can't be a good father to his kids, and he's created this elaborate business. I mean, the thing that I think that's most telling in the movie is the scene in Mombasa where he's running down that alley and the walls get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer together. But, some people will get into it tonight. Watch Elizabeth and I on Whining About Movies, and we'll talk about it even more. But I'm a huge fan of Christopher Nolan. But I think that the most important thing from a business perspective about Christopher Nolan is how basically he has partnered up with one studio. Obviously, this article talks about how in 2001 he pitched the idea for Inception as a horror film, but he developed an ongoing relationship with Warner Brothers. Now he made Insomnia, which was a remake of a Scandinavian film, and that went well, and the studio liked him. Then he went off and they gave him a crack at Batman. He made Batman for them, Batman Begins, because Batman was sort of laying fallow, and what was it gonna be? And the interesting thing about Christopher Nolan is he's a smart man. And if you've seen Memento or you've seen Following, Memento is a very smart movie. I don't think it's as smart as we all think it is. Again, Christopher Nolan builds a room, and a very elegant, very nice room, and then we come in and fill it up with the last part of that. And I think that's a great way to do things. But he brings class, he brings sophistication, and he does bring intelligence, a keen intelligence to his films, along with his brother Jonathan Nolan. And I think that the fact that a studio teams up with that kind of filmmaker, I would have thought that those kinds of relationships would continue on. When I worked at Warner Brothers 30 years ago, the studio was known for the relationships it had with filmmakers. And I think one of the great, perhaps, missed opportunities that modern studios have is not cultivating these kinds of ongoing relationships with filmmakers. And I think it was really interesting that Warner Brothers, I mean, obviously Buena Vista, he made the Prestige over there, but when he did Batman, then he was able to do Inception. And remember, when Inception was going to come out, no one at Warner Brothers thought it was going to be a hit. The Warner Brothers marketing team was famously telling people, at least internally, that Inception wouldn't have been a hit if it wasn't for them. And I say, no. Inception was a smart, elegantly, beautifully made film, and the reason it connected with audiences was because it was new, fresh, and original. And it was by somebody who is smart and understands what they're doing. And I think that's... can you imagine if we had studios cultivating relationships with filmmakers like that all the time? If all the studios were doing that? I think it'd be great. I think that the relationship Warner Brothers has with Christopher Nolan, sure, you have to have a visionary director that knows what they're doing. But the fact that Warner Brothers has, for the most part, Interstellar was a co-production, but they've really understood what they had. They allowed Christopher Nolan to make Dunkirk, a movie that most Americans weren't familiar with. They didn't understand what happened at Dunkirk, but they allowed him to go basically make a World War II art film. And again, it found an audience because it was smart and exciting and visceral, and it connected. And in a way, Dunkirk is also very dreamlike, but it provides something that we don't normally see at the movies, and it gives us a sophistication that I think is important. And I think if you want to learn and understand what Hollywood needs more of, it needs more filmmakers like Christopher Nolan, who is a writer, director, a visionary, and he's very unique in the world today. That's why I want to see Tenet. I mean, Tenet might be something there might be a little gobbledygook in there, kind of like there is in Dark Knight Rises. But I think whatever it's going to be beautifully presented. It's going to be elegant. It's going to be thought-provoking, and I'm going to probably want to see it 8 times. And I think that's great, and I think that's what we need today. Anyway, I just thought that was worth sharing. So It bums me out that today Tenet has been taken off the release schedule indefinitely. And once again, I'm going to go back and revisit Inception and talk about it tonight on Whining About Movies. So there you go. And guess what? I have a letter from, guess who? Our chairman, Jeffrey Mao. That's right. Dear Sifu Rob and the School of Post-Geek, I write to you today of the Criterion Collection presentation of Bruce Lee, his greatest hits on Blu-ray. Well, any of you that are collecting physical media, if you're wondering what Chairman Mao is talking about, it's this. Now, I have not, look, you can't see my face. I've not even cracked open this. I got this at the Barnes & Noble sale, 50% off. 50% off. How can you not get this? If you like physical media, you have to get it. Needless to say, it's a wonderfully well put together package, as Criterion Collection is always good for that. We get 4K restorations of Lee's Chinese language films, The Big Boss, Fists of Fury, The Way of the Dragon, and the 2K restoration of Enter the Dragon. This will be a bit of a review of the set, as well as an overview of Lee's filmography and the Bruce Lee phenomenon. So needless to say, Bruce Lee is an entertainment, martial arts, and cultural icon rivaled only by a few. He occupies that pantheon of died too young but left a huge legacy stars such as James Dean or Jimi Hendrix. It's inarguable and inevitable that these stars become mythologized, lionized, and deified, perhaps to an extent that they would never have achieved if they had not died young. Lee would have turned 80 years old this year, and it's hard to imagine an 80-year-old Bruce Lee, but it's hard to imagine any of these people in old age. The first thing to note about the Criterion Collection set is that not only are you getting high-quality restorations of the films as never seen before, but for his first 3 films, you get the original Mandarin audio tracks. This has been something that I've been particularly looking forward to. Me too, by the way. Another thing that the set also sets right is the titles of the films. I have the old DVD box set of Lee's films that continued the incorrect titling of the films. Lee's first film, The Big Boss, was called Fists of Fury in the West. Let me read that again. Lee's first film, The Big Boss, was called Fists of Fury in the West. His second film, whose proper title is Fists of Fury, was called The Chinese Connection to avoid confusion. So I don't want to hear anyone calling it Fists of Fury. It's Fist of Fury, and that's his second film. The restoration of the Mandarin tracks also allowed me to connect to the films as Chinese films first, and not just Bruce Lee films that anyone watched on the Saturday afternoon Kung Fu double feature. What Criterion have done, along with other labels like 88 and Eureka, in presenting high-quality restorations of classic martial arts films, is that they have given them respect and elevated them above the sloppily dubbed pan-and-scan versions of the past. Sure, I was only able to understand about 2/3 to 3/4 of the dialogue given the vocabulary used and the thicker mainland accents, but it just felt nice to be able to hear what it would have originally sounded like. I know that these films all had dialogue recorded in post, but from what I could tell, the actors were, for the most part, speaking their lines in Mandarin on set based on their mouth movements matching the dialogue. I've never heard Lee speak Chinese, so it's pretty cool to hear him speak it. But what it did allow me to do was connect to him as a character more in both The Big Boss and Fist. The Big Boss and Fist. See, I want to say Fist of Fury. His was a better character in both of those films, as he was more human with flaws and doubts. In The Big Boss, he is naive and quick to violence. In fact, he wears a jade pendant as a reminder of a promise he made to his mother not to fight. When he is tempted to do so, he looks at it to remind himself. Lee actually doesn't even fight for the first time in the film until well over 40 minutes have passed, and when he does so, he discovers that the pendant has broken. Lee is not the Superman here that he was in either Enter the Dragon. That he wasn't Enter the Dragon. He makes mistakes. He promises his cousins at the ice factory, where he is the foreman, that he will go to the police and ask about their missing co-workers. However, instead, he gets wined and dined by his manager, ending up drunk and in bed with a prostitute. Contrast this with his character in Enter the Dragon, who refuses to drink and goes on a secret mission while his fellow tournament competitors partake of the female companionship. In Fist, Lee is an extremely skilled and dangerous martial artist, but his thirst for revenge and the death of his master and his impulsiveness get him and his school in big trouble with the local rival Japanese school. Lee's characters learn important lessons here that while they can beat up anyone they fight, their actions still have consequences for their families, friends, and loved ones. He'd like nothing better than to cave in the faces of every Japanese goon, and he does literally make them eat their words, forcing 2 of them to eat the paper on which the phrase "sick man of Asia" is written. However, by doing so, does he dishonor and disrespect the memory and teachings of his beloved Sifu? By the time of The Way of the Dragon, Lee's international popularity was evident, and that allowed him to take the helm for the film, writing, producing, and directing it. With Lee in charge, to borrow a phrase from professional wrestling, he was not going to book himself to lose. Way is arguably the weakest of his films, with the iconic climactic duel to the death with Chuck Norris, set appropriately at the Roman Colosseum, overshadowing anything else in it. Lee then went on to start work on what perhaps would have been his greatest film and his passion project, Game of Death. More on that later. However, he was then offered the opportunity he was looking for to star in an American studio-financed and released film that ended up being Enter the Dragon, which is probably the one film that most people who only know a little about Lee have probably seen, if they've only seen one. It actually does a pretty good job of handling the disparate elements at play, blending Lee's philosophy and martial arts style, the cloak and dagger secret agent atmosphere, some blaxploitation with Jim Kelly on debut, and a necessary American star in John Saxon. They all work well together, and the film is a who's who of Chinese martial arts for decades to come, with small roles for Sammo Hung, Jackie Chan, and Bolo Yeung. However, Lee is clearly the Superman in this film and always getting the upper hand on everyone. Lee would not live to see the premiere of Enter the Dragon, having died days before its release. Therefore, he would not finish Game of Death either. The final version of that was released in '78. It is quite honestly a complete mess. Cobbled together from what footage he did shoot, stock footage, double shot from behind, and laughably superimposed shots of Lee's face on top of another actor's body. It's the one that makes every Lee fan look down and shake their heads in disbelief. The other thing about Game of Death that casts a pall over Lee's fans is the element of the plot where Lee's character is an actor and someone is trying to kill him while on set. This, of course, would tragically happen in real life with Lee's son Brandon while filming The Crow. Smartly, this set includes an updated version of the complete footage that Lee did shoot for Game, which is the famous Tower Boss battle, starting with his fight with his student and friend Dan Insante and ending up with a sunglasses-wearing, shorts-wearing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, also a student of Lee's. I'd seen his short film before on a Lee documentary, I believe, and its presentation here on the disc is lower in quality than the film's, understandably. Also, the sound mix is a little odd, but according to the notes on the disc, the dialogue track was redone. As for the rest of the set, its supplemental material is extensive, as to be expected from Criterion. It's unlikely I'll ever watch anything close to a fraction of it. There are some interesting inclusions here, such as a slightly extended version of Enter the Dragon, and perhaps unnecessarily Game of Death 2. Its inclusion here is perhaps only to highlight the concept of Bruceploitation, the spate of films that came out after Lee's death that sought to capitalize on his name and fame, using actors who resembled Lee, and even naming one actor Bruce Lee with an I. My friends and I used to call him Bruce Lie because, well, he was a lie. Well, Sifu Rob, that's all I have today, and I encourage everyone to go out and get the set. Thanks, Jeff. And you can get this set if you're interested at Barnes & Noble for half off. This is the first thing that arrived from their sale because it came out. They just shipped it directly to me. And if you're at all interested, wow, it is, well, I don't know, actually, to be honest, but it is very extensive. I haven't cracked mine open yet because I haven't had time. But I'm sure it's, as Jeffrey Mao said, as our own chairman said, it's awesome. I mean, why not? I grew up with Bruce Lee movies. It'll be nice to see them. I'm really excited to see them in their final, in their real language, their original language. That will certainly be interesting to see. Cannot wait, to be honest. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to start out with this today, but I have a letter from Willow Yang that I've actually been waiting to read. I mean, I've been waiting. I've been sitting on it. I just got it today, but I've been waiting to read this particular article, and I can't wait. This letter comes from K. Hey, Rob, or your Robsexcellency, if you will. That's a new one, Robsexcellency. I don't know if I can take that on as my own nickname. Was taking my shot at the nickname Robbo fame. Sorry for the near miss. If it was, laugh out loud. So I don't think it's a near miss. Of course, Robsexcellency is something I think about all the time about myself in my own mind. Where to start, I suppose? The beginning. Good place as any for most stories I've found. Not always, though. I first came amongst your channel and the faithfully esteemed brilliance of the imagination connoisseurs with Robservations episode 370, shortly after the first lockdowns were implemented here in the U.S. Since then, to say your commentary, insights, and community-building endeavors have been inspiring would be an understatement to the utmost, good sir. At first, I consciously and now habitually use whining about movies to mark the length of quarantine, like tally marks in a holding cell, but a cell with the Burnettwork and its many festival adornments to boot. So we got that going for us, at least. It's funny you say that because I think Elizabeth and I are using whining about movies as it's definitely our check marks as to when quarantine happened. While there is so much to love and rant about in appreciation of yourself, the content, and the community, which there is, for me personally, I think I love how much you remind me of my dear, dear friend and brother in every important and meaningful sense of the word. MMK. I will keep his name anonymous here. So we have MK, and then we have MK with two M's. I will keep his name anonymous here. I already embarrass him enough. The very first movie I ever watched with MK was as a junior in high school. It was An American Werewolf in London. From there, he showed me and others of our merry movie clan British gangster flicks such as Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and The Long Good Friday. The latter once he felt our tastes had matured. One of his many genre wheelhouses besides British gangster flicks were classic westerns. The Dollars trilogy, Sabata, and The Great Silence, with Herzog's boy Klaus. Being the true film aficionado he is, which is why he reminds me so much of yourself, good sir, he showed us next his great affection for Akira Kurosawa, Yojimbo, Rashomon, etc., and the non-Kurosawa but wicked cool and wild female prisoner Scorpion series. He also loved the Raid series as far as foreign films go. All of those movies, right over there. I love the female prisoner Scorpion series. I actually took that to show at a party once for some of Elizabeth's friends who have become my friends, and I showed a trailer for one, and let's just say didn't go over well. I cannot tell you, Sir Rob, the number of times I've thought about my dear, dear MK while watching your shows. When you did the 400th episode and interviewed Barbara Crampton, I thought of MK's love of the Reanimator series. Some of his favorite horror movies, to give you just a snippet of his horror tastes, are Demons and the sequels, The Beyond, which I know you covered with Miss Crampton, Sleepaway Camp, and Pieces. If you haven't seen that last one, Sir Rob, please check it out. Pieces. You don't have to go to Texas for a chainsaw massacre. That was the ad line for that film. He also loves movies like Angel Heart and Videodrome as well, both of which he also showed me in high school. And I wonder why we and our group of lads are so wild and ungainly in our thoughts and tastes as older adults. We have come a long way from Dog Soldiers, I will say, laugh out loud. I'm actually friends with Neil Marshall, who directed Dog Soldiers. I could, and I have that over there too. I could and would go on and on and on. Let me just mention a few moments from your shows that have made me think of him. When you mention your love for the film The Keep from time to time... I do. And, in case you need to be reminded, since you brought it up... By the way, I did not read this letter in advance. Here's my letterboxed laserdisc of The Keep. Still, so far, I would say the definitive edition of this film that exists in any form of pre-recorded media. I certainly wish that one day we might get it on Blu-ray, because despite the director not liking it anymore... Anyway. The Keep from time to time, I think of K's love of author F. Paul Wilson, including but not limited to The Whole Adversary Cycle and anything Repairman Jack. Do you have any favorite F. Paul Wilson novels, Rob? I know you've said before in previous letters you love good horror and science fiction. Let me recommend to you the novel Black Wind, which MMK first recommended to me. I like the Repairman Jack books. Those are the ones I've read the most of, but there's one F. Paul Wilson novel I have a hardcover of. Is it Unborn over there? I can't see it. I kind of like that too. One other moment I will share with you before I go for now is when you and Miss Elizabeth reviewed Excalibur. I've always loved good Arthurian lore, yet it was Kay who got me to pick up Bernard Cornwell's dark agey take on the legend in his Warlord Chronicles, ending itself in the third book and its titular name, Excalibur. P.S. I enjoyed your side commentary on Gabriel Byrne during that episode. He narrated a documentary called Flight from Death, The Quest for Immortality from the early 2000s. Still one of my favorite documentaries of all time. Very impactful, in my opinion. Thank you, Rob. Thank you all for your great content. Thank you and the lady for whining about movies. Thank you for your community, and thank you so much for reminding me so much of one of the dearest people and greatest men I'll ever know, a man we nicknamed the Rosaurus for his encyclopedic knowledge of film, books, and all things pop culture. The Rosaurus. I like that. Sound familiar? In closing, Sir Rob, I don't know if the times we're currently living in are a big apocalypse like in the Bible and or War of the Worlds or X-Men, but this is in the least a small apocalypse in the sense of moving into a new normal going forwards from here in all capacities of life, commerce, and I, for one, could not think of someone I would rather Robserve the apocalypses with, both big and small, than with your high Robsexcellency. Thank you, sir, for everything. So much. Sincerely, yours, K's, Scribe, and Page. P.S. I really loved in Whining About Movies 52, Memento, you all started the ending of the show at the beginning, and originally I thought you two also forgot to rank it on purpose, only to rank it in the next episode, 53, Crash, and that was going to be a recurring thing as well. Metapocalypse right there. It was a metapocalypse right there. I have to say, though, actually, somebody suggested that to me on Twitter, starting the show at the end of it. So I can't take full responsibility. I don't remember that person's name, but it was not my original idea. I just want to be clear on that. Look, anybody who floats a good idea to me, I'll take it. I have no problem with that. Too much for my gray matters, sir. Anyways, looking forward to y'all's analysis of Inception, a.k.a. the Dreamscape ripoff. Just kidding. Inside joke with me and my buds. Inception is great, though. Sir Rob and all the imagination connoisseurs have a bigger rife for all the pups and pops in the doghouses out there in the mad world, and or for all the mamas and papas bears in their heart merry caves. Bye-bye for now, your Robsexcellency, and thank you one and all. Well, let me just say, you're just K instead of K, I guess. I think. That was a great letter. Thank you very much. Just because people sing my praises doesn't mean I'm not going to read your letter. That was very nice. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. This one comes from Doug Harris. Greetings, our existential Mr. Rogers. I'm writing about movie theaters. You and John Campea talk a lot about the fate of movie theaters if they can't reopen until next year. You and him, along with the articles you reference, a doomsday scenario for theaters. I disagree with all of you. I think the theater industry will be just fine for the near future, even if AMC, Regal, and Cinemark cease to be with little interruption. I believe this because whatever analysts talk about the theaters dying, they fail to bring up one very important group, the concession suppliers. Companies like Hershey, M&M, Mars, the Orville Redenbacher depend on theaters as well. With the candy companies, I don't know the exact percentage, but theater sales have to be a good amount since the candy holidays are Easter and Halloween. With popcorn, I have to imagine that it's somewhere around 50%. If the big theater chains go under, why wouldn't Hershey and Orville Redenbacher buy them? All the infrastructure is there and in place, plus they would be even bigger profits since they are the supplier. As important as the movie industry is to many states like Georgia, I can't see the government trying to block the purchases. Just a thought. I have others about how it might be a good idea for Netflix and Amazon to buy the independent theaters so they have a place to show their award contenders and big-budget action movies. Maybe I'm overthinking this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Doug. Well, see, the problem, Doug, is that you're asking, in your scenario, you're asking a popcorn company like Orville Redenbacher, or you're asking a chocolate company like Hershey's or other candy companies to purchase a movie theater chain, which is basically, it's a company that's making a product, and then you're asking them to become a service industry, which is what theater exhibition is. You're providing a place where people are going, and even though you're showing movies, you're still providing an experience for the public. And that is a very, very different proposition than actually making a product that you're shipping out to the world. I think it's an interesting idea, but I don't know what the margins are, but I don't think that somebody like running movie theaters is a pain in the ass. It's a pain in the ass. And it's not something, I think it would be a much easier business model to make candy and ship it out, or make popcorn and ship it out, than it is to be running movie theaters. So I don't necessarily think that they would be doing that. It's just not their business. I can see it's in their best interests to make sure, I think you have a salient point to make, that it's in their best interests to keep movie theaters alive because so much of their product is sold there. Absolutely. I mean, who doesn't want to have peanut M&Ms in their movies? I mean, the best thing, my favorite thing is when you have salty popcorn and chocolate and you mix them together. I love that. Two great tastes that taste great together. But I think that, again, it's a different business. Does Amazon want to get into the movie theater business? And here's the problem. I don't think, honestly, even though Netflix bought the Egyptian theater in Hollywood, there's no incentive at all for Netflix to become a theatrical distributor. They don't want to. They don't want to. I mean, if you look at what's gone on with Netflix in the last couple weeks, they now are, look at a movie like The Old Guard, the Charlize Theron film that came out. Over 75 million people viewed that movie, probably on its march in less than a month. Probably on its march to 100 million views. That's a lot. And Netflix has an entirely different business model. They do not benefit at all to release their movies theatrically. I mean, I'm sure that they put The Irishman out because they had to, because it was Martin Scorsese. And while it was great for Oscar buzz, it didn't help them win any Oscars. Netflix, they don't have to do that. It's a new world. I mean, as much as I love movie theater distribution, and I do love it, I love it so, I don't want to see Tenet on TV for the first time. I want to see it in a big theater. Blade Runner 2049 was one of the greatest movie-going experiences I've ever had. I love seeing that in a giant IMAX theater. There's nothing better than theatrical distribution, but that's because I grew up that way. You know, I grew up going into giant movie houses that in my lifetime, the giant movie houses just got smaller and smaller and smaller. While I do love the IMAX screens that brought back, you know what IMAX screens are to me? IMAX screens, as much as I love them and as big as the screens are, well, when I was a younger kid, all theaters seemed like IMAX screens to me. When I would go in Seattle growing up, if I would go to Northgate or South Center or the John Dance, these were all basically the same movie theater. These gigantic rectangular boxes with huge screens and thunderous sound systems. And in my mind, movie theaters were where we would go see this giant image. And I grew up seeing giant movies, and that's what made me fall in love with films. And over the course of my lifetime, movie theaters gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. One of the things that I've really enjoyed is the ArcLight cinemas, even though they're multiplexes here, they're premium theaters that you pay a little extra money for. They don't have, they don't have the Dolby Cinema, AMC Dolby Cinema reclining seats and all that. But what they do have is, even though they're multiplexes, their screens are still big enough. They're just on the edge of being small, but they're not small. Their auditoriums are big. And I'm proud to say a relative of mine was the president of Pacific Theaters for a long time, Jerry Foreman. And the ArcLight, no matter what auditorium you go into, the auditoriums are big enough that you still get a theatrical experience. And so often that wasn't the case. And I think that, what's happening, the reverse, we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger televisions. And when you can get bigger and bigger televisions, a great home theater, which I've watched as our cinema screens get smaller, we're getting bigger and bigger TVs, widescreen TVs with better technology, better, richer blacks, like OLED technology. It's still really expensive, but I think the inevitability is that eventually, I don't think movies and entertainment are going to go anywhere, but the theatrical experience is going to be saved, unfortunately, for movies like Tenet. And I think theaters aren't going to go away, but, I'm not going to be able to see, say, smaller films. I think any movie, it doesn't matter what it is more effective if you get to see it on a bigger screen. The bigger screen, the better. Because it becomes, from a psychological standpoint, there's more going on. You're taking in more. So, anyway, I appreciate the letter. But I think that movie theaters are in danger, at least the bigger chains, because it's not just movie theaters, it's their entire business. I mean, their support staff, their administrative staff, the rent they're paying. It's a lot. I mean, unless we get movies back into theaters quickly, and again, where other countries had a comprehensive, from the very top, a government of, in our case, a federal government, we've had no federal government overall approach to this pandemic. None. It's been fractured. There's been literally no leadership at the top, at the federal level. It has been, I've never seen such a dereliction of duty since I've been alive and been an American for the time I've been here. Trump has said he's going to begin more pandemic briefings every day. Well, what I'd like to see is not briefings. I'd like to see a course of action. I would like to see that. I really hope that President Trump gets up and, instead of giving briefings because he wants to see himself on TV talking more, that there's an outline of a course of action that will really mean something. I mean, whether you believe it or not, it's happening. You can believe in the flat earth all you want. The world isn't flat. It isn't flat. And I think that we in this country need to get back on track and realize, you can't build smartphones and you can't carry around a supercomputer in your pocket without really understanding science. And you know what? Whatever you believe, your smartphone works, doesn't it? Why don't you believe in that technology? Why don't you believe in where all that science came from? Do you know just how much science is in your cell phone? How much the culmination of literally thousands of years of science, you're carrying it around in your pocket. Well, that same science can be applied to medicine as well. And we need to start thinking of it in those kinds of terms, because hopefully if the CDC were allowed to do their job, and they should be the first repository of all this information. Well, if we had a national mandate of some kind, maybe we could lick this thing quickly and our theaters can reopen. I mean, I want to see this pandemic go away, if nothing else, than because I want to see Tenet in an IMAX theater. And I cannot believe I live in a country like the United States that has a raging global pandemic in its borders, where everyone else is being able to tamp it down. But we can't. Epic fail. I don't think I've seen a bigger failure on a national level in my entire lifetime, at least that I've been aware of. Pretty bad. And selfishly, yes, people are dying. The death rates are going. The infection rates are going up. But I just want to see Tenet. I know that might make me selfish. I'd like to see this disease go away too. It'd be nice, because I want movie theaters to survive. Don't you? I know you do. I know everybody does. Omar94 sends in a letter and says, "Hi, Rob. I wanted to give you, your moderators, and the viewers a recommendation for a movie I like and think is underappreciated. So here goes. My movie recommendation is a 1942 fantasy romantic comedy called I Married a Witch. It stars Veronica Lake from Sullivan's Travels and Frederick March from The Best Years of Our Lives. Thanks, and live long and prosper." Now, I'm going to check on this. I have I Married a Witch on Blu-ray. But isn't I Married a Witch the first adaptation of the story Conjure Wife that also was the basis for Burn Witch Burn? I might be wrong about this, but I'm just going to look. Let me see. It might not be. I could be wrong. No, I'm wrong about this. It's not Conjure Wife, but Conjure Wife is the basis of Burn Witch Burn. The novel upon which the film is based is mainly written by Thorne Smith, who died in 1934. His papers included an unfinished novel called The Passionate Witch. I knew it was based on a book. So there you go. I love I Married a Witch, and I wholeheartedly agree with you, Omar. It's a lovely film, and by the way, the Blu-ray is great. And who doesn't like Veronica Lake in anything? So I agree. I absolutely agree with you. Dean Mikatich is here. Dean says, "Hi, Rob and the PGS. Rob, you've said on many occasions that Viacom CBS will not do a remaster of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, as the sales of the remastered Star Trek The Next Generation it did not do as well as they'd hoped. Over the last few days, I've been thinking, what if there was a fan campaign to raise the money to do the remaster through GoFundMe or some other website? Would Viacom CBS go for it? If the funds could be raised, I cannot see Viacom CBS saying no if there is no loss for them. I know this will cost millions to do, but we have seen fan projects raise money before. Just look at Axanar that you worked on, and Alec Peters is still raising money for it. I have not been following that project since the lawsuit, but I know he's filmed 2 15-minute segments that was allowed from the lawsuit ruling, so I don't know what the extra funding raising is for. I don't either. It would also show Viacom CBS that there's a demand for it and they were willing to officially back the campaign. It could be seen in the fan base as goodwill after the dismal JJ and Kurtzman era of Star Trek. If the campaign were successful, we could do even another one for Star Trek Voyager as well. What do you think? Is something like this possible? Personally, I think Viacom CBS should do it for DS9 and Voyager before it becomes too late and these shows will not be able to get remastered and become lost to the sands of time. Peace and long life, Dean. Well, as many of you know, I am a huge proponent of doing this. Here's the problem with the remaster of Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager. The Deep Space Nine, well, the Star Trek The Next Generation remaster is the single greatest restoration in the history of the television medium. And I'm not just saying that because I worked on it. It took basically a team of 30 people 4 years to do that restoration. And it would take 4 years to do Deep Space Nine and 4 more years to do Voyager. It is a huge, Herculean, very labor-intensive process. And the problem is not just the money. I would assume TNG was done from, they say, I would say it was north of $12 million. I don't know the actual amount. They've never released that number. But I'm willing to bet you that it would cost about $20 million to do Voyager and $20 million to do Deep Space Nine. We're looking at $40 million of investment. There's no way any crowdfunding would ever raise that much money. And it would take 8 years total. You'd need the wherewithal. The problem is, I agree with you. I think it was a huge mistake not to make that investment and bring bring Deep Space Nine and Voyager. They had the team in place. They had the methodology in place. They had the pipeline in place. What they basically have to do is take Star Trek Deep Space Nine and Voyager all the way through the post-production process again. They have to go back and get the original negative. They have to scan the original negative, color correct it, and then they have to recomposite all the effect shots, which were shot on 35 millimeter. And then when it comes to Deep Space Nine and Voyager's heavy use of CG as the show moved on, yes, they have all, and even if they have all the scene files or everything was done, they can't just up-res them. They were finished at NTSC resolution, which means not only, well, you might have them so you don't have to build them from scratch, but then you have to go augment each one of those shots, which is incredibly labor-intensive, and it's going to cost a lot more money. So that's the problem. It's going to cost you $20 million per show, and it's going to be amazingly labor-intensive. And you're going to basically have to do it over the course of 8 years. Who's going to do that? Where's the team? It was amazingly short-sighted. First of all, Ken Ross, who was a CBS executive who got the whole project financed, it was his vision to do this, which was amazing. And it was financed by 3 different divisions within CBS. One of them being home video, the other being syndication, and I think the other one was worldwide syndication or something. 3 different divisions kicked in, and you have to ask yourself, so you're going to spend $20 million on Deep Space Nine. Nobody spends $20 million unless they know they can get their money back. How are they going to get that money back? How are they going to get that money back? I mean, when you spend that extra $20 million, are you going to get streaming services that are already licensing Deep Space Nine to pay double for something they already have? When you say, no, this is much better looking now because it's an HD. Yes, but is it $20 million better? Well, we would know it is. I absolutely, in my mind, it would be. But how do you convince the people that are paying a license fee for it? And eventually, is CBS All Access? Who knows how long they're going to be around? And we already know that there's supposedly a rebranding coming. It's not like CBS All Access is making a fortune because, as anyone knows, they don't have enough original programming to make it worth their while. I mean, as someone pointed out, basically $20 million is 2 episodes of Star Trek Discovery. I agree. If they can finance that garbage, why can't they take care of Deep Space Nine and Voyager? I don't know. That's what I would be pushing for. But I don't think it's ever going to happen. I'd love to see it happen. And when deep learning AI comes along, it's never going to be the same as it is going back to the original negative. Dean Mikitich goes on to say, with Hollywood shut down and most of the year releases being pushed to X, we're seeing no new major films now. It's rumored that California will be in lockdown until the end of the year, which is not a major issue for the film industry as they have film that are ready to go, and once they get back into production, they can produce more, which will mean this year is a blip. However, it's a different story on the TV side. There are not as many shows in the can and ready to go, and a lot of shows had to shut down production before they even finished filming their previous season. Normally, at this time of year, they would be in full production for the season that would start again in September, and this is not the case. It is unlikely we could see any of our favorites returning for at least another year, and that if they do at all. So, Rob, as most shows are filmed in LA or Canada or in Atlanta or in New York, can you see the TV industry spread out and maybe move more production overseas? So if there was another crisis like this, we are currently seeing the major studios can get production going once again, once an area has come out of lockdown. Peace and long life. Well, Dean, you'd think so. The problem is there's only so many crew in the world, and there's also the problem of housing actors. I mean, sending actors to other countries and things is difficult. It's going to be rough. It's going to be rough. We'll see what happens. I mean, we're getting back into the swing of production. Maybe Universal's 109-page document will be adopted across the board. I don't know. But you bring up a good point. I think TV shows are they going to come back? We'll see. It's going to be tough. It's going to be very tough. See, the problem is, if I would say that if, say in California, production were to come back, if we had flattened our curve and crushed it, well, then it would be easier. The problem is there's so much of the disease flowing around because you have half the people complaining about wearing masks. You have people who won't, they're wandering around. You've got kids out there. Let's go party. Let's have, there has not been, especially in this country, that we didn't take it seriously enough. So we haven't done the work to allow production to come back, unfortunately. And the problem is, once production were to come back, the first time somebody shows up to work and they're positive, there goes that, it's shut down. We haven't managed this disease to the point where we can bring production back. Certainly not like they did in New Zealand. It's our own fault. It's too bad. It's a bummer. But we reap what we sow. Which is... James Moore says, Rob, I just got the Blu-ray of Star Trek The Next Generation, and I always hesitated on buying it because I already bought the VHS and the DVD editions, but wow, what a difference. I can see everything. All the detail that was missing in the older version, Picard's freckles, the actor's makeup, the details of the ships, everything is so much better. I also love your special features. I'd give my right testicle to have you make a Star Trek show. Keep up the good work. Well, James, thank you. I mean, I would love to work on a Star Trek show. Problem is my career just has not supported me being hired into that capacity, unfortunately. I'm a realist about these things. I mean, maybe if I were to am able to get a couple more things off the ground, I would love that. I would love to be in a consulting position. to create a Star Trek show. I think that would be a lot of fun. I'd love to direct episodes and edit and be an executive producer. I think that would be a lot of fun. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think if this makes any sense, I work with Roger Lay doing these things, and even though he gets directing credit, Roger was doing Enterprise and I was doing Next Generation, and I conducted the majority of the interviews. So the questions that I was asking the actors, the information I was getting back, I take a lot of responsibility for that. And I also edited all that stuff myself. So each one of those documentaries was sort of my take on the season. And I'm glad you feel that way, because I tried to bring an insightful and in-depth look at every season of TNG. And it really does stand as my how I thought about the series and how I thought about Star Trek. So I'm glad you got to see it. I've tried to make people understand that the Blu-rays are 6 times better, in a nutshell, than anything you've seen before. The colors, you were looking at NTSC video. There was no true blacks. And the Next Generation discs, they are certainly gorgeous, aren't they? So good. Stubble McShave is here. Hi, Rob. Tom Clancy once said, "What's the difference between reality and fiction?" Well, fiction needs to make sense. A constructed story needs to make sense, and that includes avoiding plot holes. One thing that exemplifies good storytelling is a cohesive story that makes sense and stays consistent in its world building and motivations. Logical gaps in either the world, the story, or the character motivations are often referred to as plot holes. In a nutshell, plot holes are those deviations in a story world's logic when the writers either bend their own rules and character motivations or conveniently invent new ones. If you have your setting in a secondary world or as a speculative story in our world, then the world building and its consistency is more important than if it was set in our mundane world. In a mundane world, we can accept some discrepancies, but in a fantastical setting, we can't afford that. People have already stretched their suspension of disbelief to a certain point, and their buying into the story would not survive any discrepancies from the established world and its rules. In episodic television or short stories, you can have some small deviations from the established world between each installment if you do it right. But in a movie, serialized television, or in a lengthy novel, there's very little room for any deviation of your established world. It's usually in serialized movies, television, and novel series that plot holes can be relatively common. There's usually not more than 1 or 2 plot holes, but sometimes there can be several. Rise of Skywalker. Sometimes, he wrote that, by the way, sometimes stories are good enough in all other aspects so that audiences forgive the lapses when it comes to a few plot holes. They usually lead to bizarre fan theories. On the other hand, in some cases, the plot holes are so severe, or the story was also such a letdown, that the audience gets pissed off. We all know that a really good storyteller can tell a complex story with a sustained logic that avoids the looming plot holes in its way. For long-running stories, such as episodic long-running TV series, the creators sometimes add on or partially rewrite the rules. This doesn't work in a completely serialized canon. The easiest way to avoid plot holes is for the storyteller to know what the end point is for the story and the characters. If the storyteller knows where it ends up, then he or she can set up all the elements that make it work and spot any potential problems. It's also a good idea if the storyteller knows the purpose for every character that's featured. Why is that person in this story? What are the parts of the story that the character is needed for? For this reason, it's also important that the storyteller knows what the end is and where it's all leading. If a central character focuses on his car throughout a lot of the movie or book, then we, as the audience, assume the car will have an important part in the story that's being told. If the character focuses on the car in the first half of the story, and then it doesn't have any role to play, we ask ourselves, well, what about the car? What happened to it? You can't bring up a subject like plot holes and not mention Star Wars. If you look at the first 2 trilogies, there were, without a lot of plot holes unto themselves. Before you start screaming in protest, I'll tell you what I mean. There were without a lot of plot holes. The original trilogy was not created with a detailed storyline from the beginning, but Lucas always knew what the end point was. When he did episode 4, he had no idea about Yoda, and he probably didn't have Luke and Leia as twins in mind. He did know what the end point was, and that was going to be the part where the Emperor and Vader were going to have, so he always worked toward that end point. The prequel trilogy was more cohesive in its planning, but I'm sure he had no idea about General Grievous when he made The Phantom Menace. Those details were worked out as the movies were individually made. There are, however, some plot holes between the original and the prequel trilogies. The most famous is that Leia said she remembered her mother. Now, people have tried to explain that away with different creative solutions, but let's face it, it's a plot hole. There are a few others, but they're mostly between the trilogies, not within the trilogies. Now we come to think the sequel trilogy, and I won't mention the dozens of plot holes within this trilogy, but I think we all know that the storytellers had no idea where the story was going to be tried to make it on the fly. By making it up as they went along, there are a lot of plot holes between the films. But there's also a lot of plot holes within the movies. They usually have to do with breaking established rules for how hyperspace works and the concept of time and distance, not to mention the economics of building, manning, and sustaining an armada of capital ships. I won't get into any more sequel trilogy bashing, but it's clear that if a hallmark of a good storyteller is to tell a compelling story without any big plot holes, then the new creators at Lucasfilm failed miserably. So those are my thoughts on plot holes. Thanks, Stubble McShay. Well, Stubble, a good letter. Let me tell you, want me to let me tell all of you people out there, I'm going to explain the plot hole with Leia remembering things about her mother. Do you know why Leia can remember things about her mother even though her mother died in childbirth? Because they had a connection through the Force. There were images and impressions and things that mother instilled to child while they were in the womb. I don't find that, I've never found that to be a plot hole at all. We are too literal, like, well, I didn't get to, like, hang out with my mom. You're a child of the Force. You know, you were born via whatever that is. You have Force energy. You're part of the legacy of the Force. Your father was the chosen one. Your mother was able to imbue you with memories that she conveyed to you throughout her pregnancy. I don't think that this is at all something that's difficult to understand. It's just that we tend to go, well, what I find interesting about plot holes with a lot of people is that, you know, there are leaps of logic that you can make, I think. And when dealing with something like the Force, I would just assume that the connection between mother and child, that your mother in the Star Wars universe, her impressions and things, she's going to be sharing things with you more than just amniotic fluid and nurturing and nutrition and things that are keeping you alive. You're going to have a psychic connection too. We've seen that there's psychic connections in Star Wars through the Force. I don't think it's a big leap to understand that how a mother, especially with Force-sensitive children, that it would be the minds are reaching out and touching what's the closest mind other than your sibling, your mother. And you're probably, anyone who's Force-sensitive probably develops a link with their mothers. I mean, I haven't read that or anything, but I think it's pretty obvious. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a plot hole, even though everybody does. I'm going to jump in and see what you guys have to say. I didn't realize I've been doing this for so long without seeing what you guys have to say today. Let's see who's here. Bunyan Snipe is here, sends in a tip and says, if you want to try out Star Citizen, I have a game package that I won last year that you can have. Well, Bunyan, I would absolutely take that from you. Does it work on a Mac? I am Mac'd up. I ain't PC, yo, I'm the Mac. Just so you know. I would love that. Please contact me. I would love to play Star Citizen. Dangerous Lee sends in a tip and says, Rob, we all had a field day when it was announced a while back that James Dean was being resurrected for a new film. What if they announced tomorrow that Bruce Lee was being resurrected to complete his intended version of Game of Death? Yay or nay? Big nay on that for me. You could never, I mean, you know, in our digital world, I think, and we're going to have to deal with this in the future a lot. And I'm sure, you know, in 50 years, no one's going to care. We've digitized Bruce Lee down to the last pixel and whatever. We can recreate our AR. Bruce Lee AI is perfect. The whole point of watching somebody like Bruce Lee is to watch Bruce Lee. The magic he brings to the screen. I don't want to watch a digital recreation of that. I'd like to watch another human being be as charismatic and adept with martial arts as Bruce Lee was. But I like the idea that Bruce Lee only existed in a certain part of time and space and all that. And I like the idea that now I own this. I don't want to see a vision of Bruce Lee that's not Bruce Lee. I think it's a bad idea. Willow sends in a tip. Hello, Willow. How are you? Don't think I haven't forgotten about your letter, Willow. My mom and I started One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and we got into a debate over whether or not Jack Nicholson is handsome. I love him as an actor, but I've never found him to be attractive. My mom disagrees. What's your opinion? Well, first of all, I would say this. You grew up in a world, Willow, where people in movies and TV are too good looking. They're too good looking. We've now been conditioned. Back in the 70s, one of my favorite eras of motion pictures. That's when Milos Forman made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Look at the people. You had Danny DeVito. You had Vincent Schiavelli. You had Brad Dourif. Look at all the people. Look at all the great character actors that are in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And Jack Nicholson is clearly the best looking of them. But I think Jack Nicholson is a very handsome man. But he also looks real. He looks like he's from the real world. He doesn't look like he's from movie or TV world now. People are just too damn good looking. And that's fine. Those people are real, but they're also scrubbed within an inch of their lives. And I think that one of the things that makes One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest so believable is R.P. McMurphy, Jack Nicholson's character. You buy it, that you feel the reality of his character. I think Jack Nicholson was actually a very handsome guy, but handsome in a real way. Like he looks like he stepped out of the real world as opposed to being clearly somebody that only exists in movie land. And that's not to say these people, I mean, we have people now that they work out more than they've ever worked out. They go on nutrition regimens that only work if you're working on a film. You know, you can't possibly keep up with them all the time unless you're a bodybuilder. So I think that's one of the things that we grapple with is that people are just too damn good looking. But it's nice that your mom finds him attractive. Isn't that interesting? But I can understand. You know, you grew up in a world where you expect something from your film stars. I don't think you're wrong. I just think it was a style. Emil Johansson says, Jonathan Nolan said he was inspired by video games in Westworld. I think he only sees the violence from games like Grand Theft Auto. That's why his show is cynical. Yeah, you know, I've only really delved into the first season of Westworld, and it felt a lot of it. There's a lot of video game logic, but you might be right about that. Emil goes on to say, I think about game design when I watch Inception. I think there's definitely a little bit of game design in Inception and jumping from place to place. But I do think that Inception really is inspired more by dreams and things like that. NJR 1984 sends in a super chat and says, do you remember any of the trailers that played in front of Star Wars, Empire, or Jedi during their initial runs when you saw them? You know what? I cannot. And to be honest, I don't remember there even being trailers at Star Wars, Empire, and Jedi. I remember I went to see, check this out. Before Empire Strikes Back came out, they had re-releases of Star Wars. And I went specifically to see a trailer for The Empire Strikes Back. The trailer was at the end of the movie. It wasn't at the front of the movie. It was at the end. So I don't even remember trailers, because it was a different world than it is today. But I don't remember every time I saw Star Wars and Empire, but that could just be me. I wouldn't have remembered anyway, because I was so excited to see Star Wars and Empire and Jedi. So I don't remember. I don't know if they played trailers. I really don't know. And I always went to these big theaters that didn't really, the presentation was the presentation. Emil Johansson goes on and says, watch mid-90s. That's really awesome. That's Jonah Hill's movie. That's his directorial debut. You know, I saw a bit of it. I liked it. I thought he did a really good job with that. It definitely was evocative of the time, and there was a lot of verisimilitude in that movie. Justin Tonner's here with a super chat. Thank you very much, sir. Very generous of you. Hi, Rob. I've gone through the Criterion Bruce. Oh, have you gone through the Criterion Bruce Lee set? I have not. It's awesome. The 4K restorations and the extras are great. I watched The Big Boss and Fist of Fury so far. Breakfast Club arrived today. Can't wait to dive into the extras. Yeah, you know, obviously you went to the Criterion sale. Good for you, sir. Amazing. I love that. And yeah, pretty cool stuff. Our man Claudius is here. Claudius sends in a tip and says, Monsieur Robert, Nolan made a film about dream building as an allegory to filmmaking. Cinematic language is dreamlike, ephemeral, like the Mona Lisa's smile. It's more thought-provoking because we do not know. I would tend to agree with you, but I think that there is something to know there. There is a story unfolding. But yeah, you might be right about that. It is definitely an art film. But I love Inception. I can't wait to talk about it tonight, drinking one of your bottles of wine. Thank you very much. Calvin Bowles is here. Calvin says, we saw Jurassic Park at the drive-in on Friday, and Braxton asked why at the beginning did they just not have the cage lower and open automatically, and then the guy at the beginning would not have had to climb on top. Braxton, your young son, is a pragmatist, and tell him I said so. That's a very good question, but then the movie wouldn't have had an exciting opening. And as a kid, he should understand it ain't a Jurassic Park movie until someone gets eaten by a dinosaur. Please give Braxton my best. I love that you're taking him and having him seeing these movies. It's so great that he gets to see him that way, because what a way to leave an impression. You're a good dad. Nick Parrish sends in a tip and says, hope all's well today, Rob. So what are your thoughts on the 1997 film Wishmaster? That's Andrew Divoff, right? He plays it. It's definitely campy B-horror, but I have an odd liking for the movie because I like the idea of evil djinns. There's okay body horror, and I like Andrew Divoff in it. Yeah, he isn't. Okay. I thought Wishmaster was fun. I like the horror and fantastical elements combined together. I'm always up for that. Yeah, I liked it. I saw part of the second one. I wasn't digging it as much. Kind of like Warlock. I put Wishmaster and Warlock together. Kind of. I know they have really nothing to do with each other, but I kind of think of them as the same genre, even though they're not. I think by the time Wishmaster came around, I was kind of over that kind of movie, but I watched that one because I like the design. But yeah, I kind of like that movie. I haven't seen it in a while. I don't own it. Maybe I should get it. Felix Leiter's here. Hi, Exalted Robert, Grandmaster Sorcerer of Planet Robservatory. Every time Tenet gets delayed, I feel like a part of my soul is being destroyed. This must be how Voldemort felt when Potter and company were eliminating his Horcruxes. 3 delays down, 4 to go. I know, it's really maddening. It's maddening. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, movie theaters are in big trouble, but I think that live theater is in worse trouble. I agree. Some theaters will survive, but I think there's a lot of theaters that will never open up, and the lucrative locations are sold to developers and they're turned into offices. I worry about that too. I mean, New York, all those beautiful old theaters, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know who's going to pay that rent or take care of it. I mean, those are, those beautiful theaters on 42nd Street, I would hope that like a stimulus package would come in and help save those theaters, because we can't let our culture, part of what's worth living is to have culture, and I would hate to think that our culture would go away for some reason. Really, what a bummer. But let's hope. But I think you're right. I think live theater and all of these old theaters are, I'm hoping that the theaters are so old that maybe they're not rented anymore. They're actually owned outright. Maybe they're not, but I would hope they might be. And maybe those holding companies are, I don't know. Calvin sends in a tip and says, again, Calvin Bowles says, I think it's funny that in the movie Jurassic Park, Jeff Goldblum's character condemns Hammond for commercialization, but the movie makers make sure we see the logo for us to buy the toys. Well, a good point there. But the logo is kind of cool. It is a park. It is a theme park. And I think that for peak verisimilitude, I love that logo, by the way. I think it's a great logo. I love the fact that, you're right. There's something very meta, the fact that they use that exact logo as the logo for the film. It was on all the marketing and the posters and stuff. Claudius is back. Monsieur Robert, the federal government is in the business of spending money, not making it. Government projects and policies are usually obsolete before they become law. In contrast, Hollywood has only to turn a profit on a finite work of art. Yeah, that's probably true. I think you're right about that. But still, still, I think that if you've ever been on a movie set, there's a lot of efficiency that happens, the planning and execution, and it would be nice to see the government be able to do that. But you might be right. Rusty Shackelford sends in a super chat and says, "What alternate endings have you preferred to theatrical? I Am Legend's ending, where Will Smith hands over the female vampire, was far superior." Oh, I completely believe, absolutely. I Am Legend, I have a love-hate relationship with that movie because, on one hand, I love Will Smith in I Am Legend. I love him. I love the way he looks. I love the way he moves. I love the way he acts. I love his character. I love everything about Will Smith in I Am Legend. I can't stand the CG creatures. I know they weren't going to originally do that. And I think that if you've read that book, the way that humanity devolves and kind of not devolves, like, on one hand, you're asking me to believe that these people, that these creatures, what's really interesting about I Am Legend, if I can go off a little bit on this, in I Am Legend, you're supposed to believe that human beings contract this disease. This cancer researcher, Emma Thompson's disease, causes them to devolve and become basically these vampiric creatures. And yet, on one hand, you see them like standing in the darkness in a circle, just rawr, 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 rawr. They're like monsters, but then they can plan an attack against Will Smith. Well, in the original I Am Legend, humanity doesn't devolve into this weird feral state. And the whole point of the book, the whole title of the book, is that Robert Neville becomes the vampire to our new creatures. That what humanity becomes, it's Neville that's now hunting them down and killing them like the vampire of legend. And when Neville is finally killed, spoiler alert, at the end of the novel, that's what he thinks to himself. He realizes that he has become the legend for this new version of humanity. And I really think that what's going on in I Am Legend in the theatrical version is muddled. And then finally, I still don't think it entirely works, but I totally agree with you. The end of the movie I Am Legend is better because there's a little bit more humanity there and it makes sense. But suddenly, I mean, just because you're a human being that devolves, you suddenly become a superhuman creature that can leap tall buildings in a single bound. I think the movie's beautifully made. Francis Lawrence did a great job of directing it. But the creatures don't work for me at all in that movie. Everything else does. Like, I would watch I Am Legend if there were no creatures in it. I mean, sure, there's going to have to be danger, but I just want to hang out with Will Smith in his post-apocalyptic New York. I love that. Eric White sends in a tip and says, "Hi, Rob. I keep wondering what the movie theater situation would be if Endgame and The Rise of Skywalker were coming out this year instead of last year. I bet everyone would be demanding theaters open right now, but they can't. I mean, it's not so much the theaters opening. It's the fact that if you go into a movie theater and you pay money, if a commercial place opens up and suddenly everyone who goes to see a movie is infected with COVID, are they liable? Or do they have to pay? And that's part of the big problem is, what are the insurance? I mean, what if a human being gets infected at your establishment? Can they sue you? Well, what if an auditorium full of 500 or 1,000 people gets infected? Do they sue you? I mean, this is the problem. Look, we could have gotten rid of this. We could have taken care of it. We could have. We did not have any leadership. We still don't have any leadership at the federal level on this. There is none. Our president is still denying half of... Look at what he said. I mean, forget the partisan politics. Forget the partisan politics. Forget all that. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. I don't care. There is no federal response. There's none. There's no coordinated federal response. There's been nobody that's gotten out in front of this from the very beginning and said, here's what we're doing. Here's what all of you have to do. We all have to stay at home. We all have to wear masks. We all have to do this. And here's why. I mean, we actually have the administration trying to discredit America's #1 infectious disease expert. If I have to listen to one more person tell me how this is all a plan for Bill Gates to come up with a vaccine to microchip the world, I mean, please, really? What is this, the 20th century? Microchip? Come on, man. So ridiculous. But they would be demanding theaters right now, but they wouldn't get it open. You think Disney would allow Endgame to open if people are going to go into theaters and could be infected? It would never happen. We could have dealt with this. Every other country in the world's dealing with this. We're not. our numbers are insane. They're insane. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And regardless of what you think about, there's a reason why we're not allowed, why Americans are not being allowed to come into any other country in the world. When has that ever happened in my lifetime? Never. Never. Ask yourself why that is. It's not because some libtard dem plot. No, it's all of us. It's all of us. We are all to blame. That's why I can't see Tenet. Bunyan Snipe says, I think Mac is planned, but not at the moment. Damn it, Bunyan. I don't have a gaming computer. Although I feel like I should work out and build a gaming PC like Henry Cavill just to increase my audience. Jason Whitcomb sends in a tip and says, Rob, someone asked about trailers before Star Wars. Well, when I saw Star Wars in 77, I do remember seeing the trailer for Damnation Alley. Fox thought that film would be their big hit in 77. They thought Star Wars would tank. Strange, huh? Damnation Alley. I remember Damnation Alley. I saw Damnation Alley. I like Damnation Alley. It had a cool truck, the Landmaster. Casper Air. You know, in Hollywood, right by Universal Studios, the Damnation Alley Landmaster used to be parked out when you went from over the 101, where you went past Universal. You could see that from Damnation Alley. It was there till 5 years ago, something like that. It was there. You could see it every day. Casper Arrow sends in a tip and says, hello, Rob. My favorite movie decade is the 1950s. On the Waterfront, A Streetcar Named Desire, Sunset Boulevard, 12 Angry Men, Rear Window, Witness for the Prosecution, and Knights of Cabria are amongst my favorites. What is your favorite decade and why? You know what? I think probably the 70s is my favorite movie decade. The 50s is a good... Look, the 40s and 50s and 70s... Well, actually in the 30s too. The 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 70s, and the 80s are probably my favorite decade of cinema. But I think there's a lot to enjoy in all decades if you look. And there was some great science fiction films in the 50s too. War of the Worlds, When Worlds Collide, Forbidden Planet, Day the Earth Stood Still. A lot of great modern science fiction was also being forged, and horror was being forged in the 50s. You think about all the ecological horror like The Beginning of the End, or Them, or Tarantula. There's Godzilla came out in the 50s. So the 50s there's some great stuff. All About Eve, of course, was Best Picture in 1950, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. So, yeah. Willow says, I do find Christopher Plummer handsome in Sound of Music and Robert Redford in Out of Africa. There are many actresses that are homely. Or is it mostly actors that can get away with looking more like an average person? I think you said there aren't very many actresses that are homely. Or is it mostly actors that can get away with looking more like the average person? I think it's different. I think it's the thing about the 70s is that the 70s was always about trying to get peak verisimilitude. You had filmmakers like William Friedkin and Coppola and Brian De Palma. They were trying to make things look real, part of the real world. And I think the idea of traditional movie stars went out the window in the 70s, as opposed to matinee idols that we'd seen up through then. So it was a whole different vibe. So yeah. But I think that in movies, and by the way, in the 70s, I think it's true too. There were a lot of more beautiful women that looked more realistic. I've talked about Meryl Streep, who is a great beauty, but when you saw her in movies like Manhattan and The Deer Hunter, she didn't look like, say, a pinup girl from California. She looked beautiful, but she looked beautiful in a real, natural way. Diane Keaton, in The Godfather, she looked like a beautiful woman, but a woman that you would actually could meet. And I think that was a whole different vibe. It changed. Bunyan Snipe says, I Am Legend should have been a Blumhouse-style low-budget feature. Man, it still can. I'm still waiting for the definitive I Am Legend. By the way, that book was one of the first horror books I ever read. Richard Matheson's book, I Am Legend. I recommend everyone read it because it's great. Calvin Bose says, I remember at the premiere of Star Trek The Motion Picture, they showed the trailer for So Fine with Ryan O'Neal, and the audience booed it, yelling, put on Star Trek. Yeah. That was very funny. So Fine was a movie about they create these jeans where the ass cheeks are clear vinyls so you can see people's ass cheeks through through the vinyl. I kid you not, that was a real movie. And my man Anthony Gonzalez is here. What was going through your mind the first time seeing Aliens in the theater? Was it a shock to movie fans at the time that Bishop saved the day, or did you see it coming? I went to a screening, a pre-release screening for exhibitors at the Cinerama in downtown Seattle. It was at noon. It was like, I want to say it was like 2 weeks before it opened. And it was a very raucous time at the movies. There was probably like 25 or 30 people in this giant theater. And it was all people I knew, people from the Seattle Film Festival and stuff. And man, it was hilarious. Hilarious. I loved it. Did I see... I didn't. I'll tell you what I didn't see was Bishop getting ripped in half. That was shocking. I mean, the whole theater was like, oh my God, because you didn't see it coming. I thought it was great. There was nothing about Aliens that I thought was predictable at all. I thought the whole thing was great. I thought it was great. Mark C. sends in a super chat and says, I saw Star Wars around July in 77. The trailer we watched made us believe a man could fly. Man, I would love to have seen that. I don't think you know why I think they didn't show trailers where I was seeing Star Wars? Because there was no plans to put where I saw Star Wars, like Empire Strikes Back played first run for 61 weeks. So there was no plans on putting another movie in that theater anytime soon. So the theaters that I went and saw Star Wars at were not Star Wars was there for over a year. Empire was there for over a year. So they didn't have any plans on booking a movie in there afterwards. That's why I don't remember any trailers for Star Wars when I saw. Mark C. said, curious, do you watch the press conferences in their entirety or just listen to the media translation? Oh, I love to watch the press conferences in their entirety. I would assume you mean Trump's coronavirus press conferences. I honestly can't believe what I'm seeing, to be honest. It's unbelievable to me. And I think that Chris Wallace interview with Fox News, I've never seen anything like that either. I mean, I think you have to watch press conferences in their entirety because, I think whenever you have a leader of any kind, whether it's a director in a movie, whether it's the captain of an industry, whatever it is, you want to believe that a good leader can walk into any situation and speak extemporaneously on a number of different subjects. Like, could walk into a room and just talk to anybody about anything. And I think that one of the problems that I have with our current president is I don't believe that he understands three-dimensionally the situation that we're facing on a number of levels. And whenever he's interviewed, I don't feel that he really knows. And that's why I get depressed about this stuff. So yeah. Stubble McShave said, I thought it would be interesting for Willow and Mom to watch something with Richard Chamberlain, like Shogun, since he was the lady's favorite until he came out as gay because of the Thornbirds. I first thought of suggesting Shogun, but it may open up a can of worms with cultural questions. That's true. It does. It is about the Japanese. That's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, they should what Willow and your mom, you should watch the Thornbirds. Just watch it. You'll like it. Anthony Gonzalez says, note to Willow and Willow's mother, if you're looking for good-looking actors, keep your distance from Sebastian Stan. That's my man crush. Well, that's pretty funny. Speaking of Willow Yang, I know you've waited all this time. Willow Yang sends in a letter. Greetings, Rob. I am writing my long overdue thoughts on the Next Generation's finale, All Good Things. I'll begin with a couple of peeves that I had with the episode. What? Just to get the negatives out of the way. First, stop trying to make Trorf happen. Wow, Trorf, that's the best. Stop trying to make Trorf happen. It's not going to happen. I don't understand this pairing. It seems to come completely out of left field. Given the rather conservative views that Worf has when it comes to adhering to Klingon customs, I just cannot see him wanting to have a relationship with someone who's not at least part Klingon. Yes, I'm aware that he will hook up with Dax in Deep Space Nine, but I'm currently only on Season 2 of that series, so I'll wait to see how they handle the relationship before giving any judgment. Secondly, I did get a bit annoyed when they kept on using the term the anomaly throughout the episode. Okay, I get that they don't want to keep on saying multiphasic temporal convergence in the space-time continuum, aka peak technobabble, but I do wish they could have come up with something slightly more creative. Finally, it's been 7 seasons and I still find Q to be as annoying as he was in the pilot, and I'm still itching to punch him in his smug, smirking face. Moreover, I don't really understand the Q Continuum's persisting obsession with putting humanity on trial. There are so many other humanoid races across the galaxy. Why do they have such an unhealthy fixation on us? I don't think they do. I only think Q does, and I think he's having a good time. Nitpicks aside, I quite liked All Good Things. Series finales can often prove to be disappointing. Game of Thrones, Seinfeld, Lost, Dexter, to name but a few examples, and I thought that The Next Generation managed to deliver a pretty satisfying conclusion for the series. While the plot of multiple timelines and parallel universes is certainly nothing new in Star Trek, what is new is the harkening back to the pilot, Encounter at Farpoint. I certainly got a kick out of seeing the old crew, seeing Denise Crosby being brought back as Tasha Yar, Worf and Troy dressed in their old uniforms, and a brief glimpse of a beardless Riker. I'm assuming that they reused previously shot footage of him rather than digitally removing his beard and distorting his face in the process. One notable thing about the past timeline was that I felt the acting was considerably improved compared to the pilot. Everyone just felt much more natural, more comfortable in their roles as characters whom they'd been playing for the better part of a decade. Of course, the standout performance of the episode was Patrick Stewart. He was able to so effortlessly and convincingly transition between the 3 different timelines, the 3 different stages of his life, from the past when he first took command of the Enterprise to the present when he was in his prime, to the future when he's become an old man with his best days behind him. The old Picard in the future timeline was easily the most flashy and memorable of the performances. It really felt like an opportunity for Stewart to showcase his acting chops. The character had a Shakespearean feel to him. He was reminiscent to me of King Lear, a once powerful and revered figure now in the midst of cognitive decline, being questioned by his former shipmates, ranting and shouting in frustration. In addition to the aged Picard, we were given a glimpse of the fates of the other characters in this version of the future, and I have to admit, it was a bit disconcerting to see Data with an entire side of his hair dyed gray, walking around in a bathrobe and acting all highfalutin. His maid says that he looks like a skunk. I thought he looked like Cruella de Vil. Then there's Beverly. Unlike the aforementioned Trorf, the pairing of her and Picard, Bavard, Picardly, has been pushed since The Naked Now and certainly makes much more sense. I do feel a bit disappointed that, after 7 seasons of tension and will they or won't they, the two finally get together to be already divorced by the time we meet them in the future. I don't know what marriage is like in the 24th century, but I'm guessing it's the much-dreaded irreconcilable differences. And I guess we never find out what happens to Wesley after he ran off with the Traveler. I'm glad that Geordi at least appears to have hooked up with Leah Brahms. I still don't understand how the chief engineer on board the Federation's flagship would have trouble getting a date. Finally, there's Riker and Worf, who have both turned into crankier, older men after Troy died in some tragic accident. It's a bit difficult for me to sympathize with their plight, however, because again, stop trying to make Trorf happen. I'd sooner believe Picard and Q are hooking up than Trorf. Oh, Willow, we know you'd rather think Q and Picard are hooking up. To summarize my thoughts, and by the way, we love you for it. To summarize my thoughts, while I'm not overly fond of the idea of a divine entity orchestrating the events of the finale, All Good Things was an elegant wrap-up for The Next Generation, essentially bringing the show full circle. The episode concluded on a rather poignant note, with Picard joining his crew for a game of poker, lamenting that he hasn't done it earlier. Is there anything more wonderful, more fulfilling, than being able to spend time with the people that you love? As entertaining as it might have been watching William Shatner playing a hysterical woman in Turnabout Intruder, All Good Things is the send-off that Star Trek deserves. Live long and prosper, Willow. Well, Willow, what a fantastic letter that you have written. Oh, Claudius says, Monsieur, did you see Kanye's press conference? Oh, I have not. I think that was yesterday. I saw a snippet about it. I haven't caught up with Kanye's latest. I have not. I have not. What did Yeezy say this time? I don't know. I have to look it up. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to an end of Robservations, episode 472. What a fine, rollicking day this has been. I want to thank you for all your support on this channel, whether it's tips or super chats and letters and the videos. Thanks to BL. Thanks to Torrin Atkinson for sending in some videos. Episode 4 of BL's show, I mean, that was particularly inspired with his fake hanging up on the internet. That was pretty funny. I have to say, BL, when I first played it, I was like, wait, what? So nicely done there. And the Bane thing was pretty good, too. If you want to send me letters or you want to send me videos, I will play them on the show and read them on the show. Just send them to me at the Burnettwork.net website. We're slowly but surely getting all of your letters up there. I know there's a great backlog. Elizabeth and I will be on tonight for Whining About Movies. We're going to be talking about Inception. I believe we're going to have to do that at 8 o'clock tonight instead of 7 o'clock tonight. So look for that tonight. Inception, we're going to talk about it. We'll whine about it. We'll drink movies about it. And if anybody is interested in this Bruce Lee box set, or if you can see it without the reflection, I do not get paid to endorse Criterion, nor do I get paid to endorse Barnes & Noble, but I would say that Barnes & Noble 50% off all Criterion discs that they do twice a year is definitely worth hitting. There's some great stuff that has come out, but why can't they bring the Ingmar Bergman box set back? I slept on that and didn't get it, and I do want to get that, but it's not available. Oh, well. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I will be back on the John Campea Show tomorrow. I want to thank you for being here. Robservations 472 is finished. And remember, every person you meet has a story to tell you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, I also want to say thank you to all my moderators. We have a new moderating staff. Well, that was weird. Am I still on? Something crazy just happened. I didn't even hit any button. I would assume that I'm still broadcasting live. Only you can tell me. What I was going to say is that, yeah, I guess I do still have a connection. I wanted to say thank you to my moderators, if I'm still broadcasting. That was another glitch. I want to thank Mike Bodden. I want to thank, of course, Greg Smith. I want to thank Joshua Levesque and Haynock, is he here, and Robert Pariso and the Richard. I think that's everybody. Thank you all for moderating and making this the channel that it is. So hopefully I will see you all tonight. Thanks very much, and as always, have a better day.